Welcome to Fabulous. My name is Sasha, and I am the co-founder of Trans Sisters United, the familiar voice at Queering the Air 3CR, and also Everybody Is on Joy 94.9 FM. And before I start, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I also would like to extend my respect to our trans elders past and present. So tonight at Trans Fabulous, I have my chosen sister. Her name is Budi Sudarto, pronounced they, them. Is a trainer and consultant with a focus on intersectionality, equity, and justice. Budi has been an LGBTQIA plus advocate for 20 years and has worked with several organizations to implement an intersectional lens based on human rights and social justice principles. How amazing is that sound? Hi, Budi. Hi. Hi, sis.
Hi,
Welcome.
sis.
Welcome to Trans Fabulous. I mean,
Thank
you know,
you.
I know you don't like all this spotlight, but you have always been so low key with what you do with the advocacy, especially. I thought I would love to have, people know about you more
Yes.
because you've been doing this for how long?
I'd say 20 years,
Mhm.
but that will show my age. So, I just keep saying to people since I was 5.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the migration over here. You're
Yes.
from Indonesia,
I am.
and I'll let you tell the story about yourself.
So I came to Australia in 1998, and hence the 25 years, 25 years ago. And typical international student wanting to study in Melbourne, and that was in the late 90s where we really didn't have much when it comes to gay and lesbian rights. And back
Yes.
then they still call it gay and lesbian.
Correct.
It
There
hasn't.
wasn't T there.
No, there
Yeah.
wasn't. Even the B wasn't even mentioned.
Mm.
Yeah, so it was gay and lesbian. And when I arrived here as a fresh international student, I felt the need that to find my clan, my sense, my group of belonging, and that's where I found, or someone actually mentioned it to me. I think this group is going to be good for you. And that group was called Gay Asian Proud, which was a workshop that was run by, back then, the Victorian AIDS Council Gay Men's Health Center. So I did that in the late 1998. The reason why I remember, because I remember we had a Christmas party and I was already part of the group. So that's always kind of like where I try to remember where things are. And so that's why I've been saying to people, I've been involved since 1998 in the LGBTQIA plus communities here in Melbourne.
I think studying abroad, especially in Australia here, I noticed, I didn't study here, I did my internship here, but I have this caucus for women and also gender expansive of color, and I meet a lot of young women and gender expansive of color in the caucus, and they can create groups in their university where they can create the safe space for themselves. So I guess this is what you did.
Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the environment was quite different. The wider LGBTIQA plus communities were, and I think still at the moment, predominantly white.
Yeah.
So everyone's now talking about visibility and inclusion. Back then, we were simply trying to exist because there was not much available for us. And even when I was involved with the queer department at my university, so I studied at Monash Uni, I think I was one of the only 2 or 3 queer people of color.
Right.
We didn't even have the word for it. We didn't even have people of color.
Yeah, true. People of color, queer, the word queer.
Well, queer we used it.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought queer was like only now.
No, queer already around since the late 90s.
Okay.
And I did my honors thesis on queer theory, so I kind of knew a little bit about it. So, and we call ourselves queer department. So queer already there, but when it comes to people of color, it wasn't, it was there, but it wasn't used a lot.
Yeah.
People just see me as a gay Asian man, which I was back then. I was identified as cisgender man. And there was simply not enough space, or the space was not given to us to do any kind of caucusing or any kind of work to address race and ethnicity and anti-racism. Again, it was such a different environment. The expectation for us was to assimilate to the dominant gay culture.
Yeah.
And the dominant gay culture was a white culture.
Yeah.
So in a way, my ethnicity and my race were hidden or made to be hidden. And people didn't like it when we actually say something that challenged this idea of white gay culture. And I did a little bit of that when I was in my early to mid 20s. Through my study, through my involvement with the queer department, and also my involvement with, again, back then, the AIDS Council, we started questioning this idea of gay Asian men as not having a space within the gay culture. We started questioning this idea of sexual racism. And again, in the early 2000s, there were a lot of discussion about sexual racism that mostly only talk from a gay man's perspective. The lesbian or same-sex attracted women's perspective was not even considered, let alone the bisexuals, let alone the queer, let alone the trans. So even then, we are criticizing ourselves. We were talking about sexual racism from a very kind of niche angle. But we forgot about a whole lot of other stuff. We forgot about the experiences of our kin. And when we did that, we got criticized. We were criticized, and everyone kept saying to us, well, let's just do one thing at a time. And we kept...
I know these words.
We can't do everything. Let's just do one thing at a time. And looking back, what we did was actually perpetuating this idea of patriarchy within the queer Asian community, because we put the men's needs to the front by sidelining or even silencing the needs of other people who are part of the LGBTIQ plus community.
And during that time as well, when you're doing this advocacy, was there trans people who got involved?
Very, very few.
Yeah.
Very, very few. Looking back, I was guilty of not allowing that space to exist. I was guilty of putting forward the gay men's agenda by silencing other voices. And I remember I was invited to Yellow Kitties. So there's a support group for Asian lesbians and queer women of Asian background.
Okay.
And I was just sitting there listening to their conversation. And I think that was the start of realizing that if we are to truly address racism in the queer community, we have to include everyone. It cannot be just from a gay man's perspective, because we already have power on the basis of our sex and gender. Right? So I think that was the start of what I do now in my work, and also a constant reminder, you can't just focus on one group. We have to be intersectional. We have to include multiple groups, because all of us are fighting for the same cause.
I guess during that time as well, do you think the word diversity and inclusion, was it as mainstream as it now?
No. So diversity was there. There wasn't inclusion. I'm trying to remember the early 2000s. This is where I started doing this kind of work. The idea of inclusion was desirable, but no one actually mentioned it. And it was very much still on the idea of we need to have diverse representation. We need to hear diverse voices. But there wasn't an appetite to actually question the system that constantly marginalize us and constantly put us as a second-hand citizen.
We need more inclusion, and I'm a big advocate of representation matters. Especially being trans, we are not being represented properly. I think it's changing now, but there's a lot of work to do.
There's still quite a lot of work to
Yeah.
do, and again, when I was doing my honors and I was doing my master's thesis was around the experiences of gay Asian men in Melbourne. So I basically interviewed my friends.
Yeah.
there wasn't
Yeah.
a lot of recruitment. I was
Yeah.
just calling my friends and
Mhm.
going, "Hey, do you want to be part of my study?"
Yeah.
And that was the time when I started to realize that when we talk about queer Asian community, we have to include trans women.
Yeah.
When we are discussing about sexual racism, we have to include the experiences of trans women from Asian background.
Yeah.
And the way racism works, whereby gay Asian men has been or have been and still continue to be
Yeah.
emasculated and being seen as sexually passive.
Yes.
Whilst, as we know from our experience, trans women of Asian backgrounds are hypersexualized.
Oh yes.
And
Fetishized as
yeah,
well.
fetishized. But we forgot that all of that constructions coming from white men's desire.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we are to question the persistence of racism, we have to question the ideology that support it.
I guilty of that because I always thought white men desire me for who I am, and I love the attention. And then when I become an advocate, it's like, no, this is wrong. They thought like Asian trans women can do the laundries, cook for them. I was like, no, honey, with these nails, it's not gonna happen. So from that onwards, I was like, oh no, he actually fetishized trans women of Asian background, like you said. And
Yes.
I start to learn that. And I thought, if I was one of the guilty as being the victim, I wouldn't say the victim, like, to be
No.
honest.
Yeah.
But I want to advocate that for my sisters here. A lot
Yeah.
of us, especially migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, who English is their second language.
Yes.
And I want to help them to understand like your self-worth.
Yeah.
We're going to change tune a little bit because I know you're a big advocate for HIV and AIDS as well. Can we talk about that? Because being Asian, there's a lot of stigma with that as well.
Yes.
You can't talk about it because you can't be, open about it because your family members going to criticize you, your friends going to criticize you. So I think it's a lack of education there. So why did you end up wants to do more with this part of the study?
So again, maybe because my involvement when I first arrived was with the AIDS Council, so I think it has been ingrained within me about sexual health and health promotion, HIV prevention, but also challenging stigma against people living with HIV. And that part of work is something that I actually still continue doing at the moment.
Yes.
Because when you say that there's still a lot of stigma about HIV within the Asian community,
Correct.
and lack of education, I have a slightly different view about that. And my view was based on growing up in Indonesia, where HIV was very much, I hate to say this, but I can't find other words at the moment, where HIV is very much a disease of the marginalized.
Correct.
It's very much when we think about HIV back then, we think about sex workers, injecting drug users, and people from a lower end of the socioeconomic status. Now, some of the people that I went to school with actually have HIV now, and that's through injecting drug use. And we are talking about people from the higher end of the socioeconomic status. But because the perception was already there, the stigma is not necessarily from HIV itself, but all the social association that comes with the virus. And Indonesia being a patriarchal, heteronormative, cisnormative society, anything that sits outside of that is seen as a taboo and a shame. So when we transfer that thinking to the Australian context, we have to realize that the Asian community here in Australia still bring the cultural understandings from their home country. And at times, they even exaggerate that because of a sense of holding on to something that matters to them the most. So it's not necessarily lack of education, but we haven't invested enough time and resources to actually enable community to understand what HIV is in the Australian context. We haven't invested enough money, not to educate per se, but to bring community together and give space for them to air out all of the misunderstanding, and then we address them one by one. That requires a long-term investment, that requires energy, and that requires human resources that are able to be culturally safe while at the same time informed as well.
Yeah. I become an advocate, not as big as you doing, an advocacy for HIV and AIDS when I was advocate for sex workers. And I tend to learn about it at the same time too, because I have no knowledge about it at all until I came here. If I don't know any knowledge about it, I'm pretty sure my peers don't know. They just do sex work and no knowledge about, how prevention can have, you can do prevention and also treatment as well. I'm very fortunate that I get to advocate that to my peers, especially sex workers, trans sex workers, and a lot of them didn't know that.
Well, absolutely. And I think from your own lived experience, from the work that I do and some of my very limited knowledge, when it comes to the sex work industry, there is already a power differential between the customers and the one providing service. And if we haven't invested enough time to actually have a conversation, that's why I keep saying to people, it's not education, it is conversation. Because when we're having conversation, we can put it in the context that actually relates to their lived experience. So in the sex work industry, we have to relate it to what they're there for, their work. And their work is to earn an income. If someone said, I don't want to use condom, but I'll pay you triple what you've charged, then of course we will think about, well, I have to provide for myself and I have to provide for my family. So of course I'll do that. If it is just pure education, the messages will be, no, you don't do that. If it is conversation, then we can actually talk about, well, if that's what you decided to do, what are some of the strategies, the tools to minimize you contracting HIV? How can you communicate it with your consumers? Where do you see the line? Where do you see the boundaries? If that's what you want to do, we are not going to say no, but these are some of the things that you can do
Of course.
within that context.
Did you hear that? I want to talk a little bit about Ananda Training. That is your own company. You're the founder of the company.
I am.
When was it established? How did it establish? And where was the passion came from?
I was working for an organization back then, and I wasn't happy. Towards the end, the environment became very toxic for me. And towards the end, I felt that I didn't have enough support. And there was quite a few negative things that was said about me. So when I did my exit strategy, so I used to have a coach back then, and she said to me, what's your exit strategy? When I said to her, I don't have one, and she's like, you need to have one. So when I did my exit strategy, I thought, what are some of my skills that are transferable, and how can I use the knowledge that I've gained throughout all these years from academia, advocacy, community work, engagement, sexual health promotion, how can I transfer it in or turn it into something that would benefit people? And how can I create something that goes beyond the idea of diversity and inclusion, but to actually questioning system, and how can I influence systemic change? And because I already have knowledge about race, ethnicity, sexuality, intersectionality, then the concept of Ananda Training on Consultancy started to emerge.
Okay.
It started to, it started with the focus of equity. So understanding that equality is not enough. We need to have equity. Started with the idea of justice, where again, it's not enough to expect us to conform to the dominant narrative or to the dominant ideology. There actually need to be justice. You know, we need to be placed at the forefront of people's thinking. And that's how Ananda is focusing on. So we very much focus on systemic change. We very much focus on how can we work with people within an organization to start planting the seeds about what needs to happen to make sure that change is sustainable and ongoing. You know, and it's very difficult because when we just focus on diversity and inclusion, a lot of people will pay money because it doesn't actually question their privilege. It doesn't question their power. It doesn't question the system that put them in power. When the conversation shifted to equity and justice, a lot of people are scared, right? Because the thinking is, you're going to take power away from me. And we keep saying to people, this is not about taking power away from you. This is about making sure that everyone's given power. And when people feel empowered, they are more likely to engage. And when they are more likely to engage, the productivity increases. You know, they will more likely to stay with an organization that actually aligns with their values because they feel valued.
You did recently this film documentary called Shape.
Yes.
That was that was premiered at the Melbourne Queer Film Festival.
Yes.
So let's talk about it.
Again, just a random conversation with the filmmaker. From what he told me, he read an article about me, and then he thought, okay, Budi will be a great person to be involved in this. And I said to him, look, I can be involved, but I'm no longer a gay man. You know, I'm non-binary. You know, I'm think I'm queer now instead of gay. And he said, that's fine. You can still reflect back about your experiences. Because we carry that with us.
There's a lot of
right?
trans women on Grindr these days anyway, too.
Yes. So we did that, and we started the conversation around body image, but looking at it from an Asian body perspective. You know, how has the Asian body been created within this white culture? Again, Asian men emasculated, trans women or even cisgender Asian women, highly feminicized, but it's all fit the narrative of the white people. So we started talking about the body and how our body, in a way, is no longer belonging to us. It's belonging to this wider social structure. And the documentary ended with questioning that. What can we do? What can we do to have a conversation, to be brave in having that conversation, and to start questioning this ideal body of hyper-masculine physique, you know, hyper-masculine attitude, and really start questioning who's benefiting from that, who's being left behind, and what can we do to equalize the playing field.
I thought the documentary was really well done. I mean, it was very inspiring as well. If you get the chance, it's called Shape. It's local Melbourne based. I think they're screening a lot of places at this moment. Budi was one of the star in that documentary. It's all relatable, even though it was based on gay experiences. But as a trans woman, we can relate to that as well because we're being fetishized all the time. So it's the same thing with a gay person of color.
It's the same thing. And again, you know, now that, you know, again, with my gender affirmation being non-binary, where I can play around with the idea of masculine and feminine, And we know this because you know this because we had this
Yes, we
conversation.
did.
When I presented myself in a more traditional feminine way,
Yeah.
you know, the attention, the you know, the way people interacted with me was significantly different when I just presented myself in a more conventional masculine way.
I totally understand. I mean, like, if I behave passively, people will treat me differently.
It's relatable, but again, you know, we are playing with the construction of a sexuality and gender expression that has been created by white men. And some of us are actually reclaiming it.
Yes.
So instead of seeing it as always negative,
Yeah.
we actually start thinking about how can we use that
As a
to
positive,
initiate
yeah.
change?
Yeah.
How can we use our femininity
Yeah.
to actually challenge patriarchy,
Exactly.
to challenge white men's desire,
Yeah.
to question this? So this is an ongoing conversation,
It is.
and it's constantly evolving. And I think that's why I like my work. It's constantly evolving.
Budi has done a lot with, trying to shape a better future for all of us, the LGBTQIA plus community, especially the intersectionality community. Is there any last word for the audiences that are watching tonight?
Given that this show is about trans fabulous, and thank you so much for expanding it to trans and gender expansive.
Of course,
You know?
yes.
And I think one thing that I do want to say to people is, you know, there's always someone that understands where you're coming from. There's always someone who you can talk to without having to explain yourself, without having to explain your race, your ethnicity, your faith, your gender. We just got it, right? And when you find those people, be kind to them and make sure that you use that connection to start thinking about how can we improve our community? How can we improve the trans community to be anti-racist? How can we improve the wider LGBTIQA plus community to put equity and justice and intersectionality at the center? And I think that's powerful because we experience multiple forms of discrimination, and to have a community where you not only feel a sense of belonging, but also a sense of purpose. I think that's the last thing that I'm going to say. Make the most of the opportunity that's given, and we all can work together.
That is a very powerful word from Budi. If you find your tribe, love them hard. This is why I love Budi. And thank you so much for being on Trans Fabulous. And
pleasure.
thank you for being fabulous as you are all the time. That was Trans Fabulous, and I'll see you on the next episode.